Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're all here on a Friday morning. We're glad to see you all. Looking forward to a great session today for the Ohio Food Policy Network. This is our chance to officially launch together the policy agenda and talk through implications and how to advance it forward together. This is going to be a very interactive session, so please feel free to say hello in the chat and we'll have a chance to say hello verbally in just a minute. But before we do that, I am really pleased to introduce Amy Basks, who has been a long-time food system advocate in Ohio and is a steering committee member of this network. She's going to share a little bit of context for this session before we begin. Welcome, Amy.
Good morning, all, and thank you, Dawn. My name is Amy Boddicker-Baskus, and I am a steering committee member for the Ohio Food Policy Network, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here this morning. The Ohio Food Policy Network is a collection of stakeholders, of food system advocates from around the state who have been working together for the last several years to collectively create a shared vision for the future of Ohio's food system. And through an iterative process over the last 5 years or more, we have begun to articulate a shared vision and shared goals, shared values for our food system. The Ohio Food Policy Network's vision is to realize a food system in Ohio that is sustainable, healthful, equitable, resilient, and accessible. And beginning in 2016, we started a process of which we called a roadmap process to articulate our values and vision and goals for our food system. And since then, we have been shaping a policy agenda that we are excited to be sharing with you all today. And our food policy agenda focuses on 4 areas, and we're going to reveal them in a main session and in breakout sessions shortly. And really our purpose today is to have you engage with these areas and the specific goals listed among them, to hear the work that you're doing and how we can collectively move this work forward. Our policy agenda is not static. It has been informed by our stakeholders through a collective process at our annual summit and through our listserv and other ways that we gather. And we're looking forward to your input and feedback today and articulating the ways that we can advance them together. And so with that, I say good morning and welcome.
Thanks so much, Amy. Great. We're so glad everyone is here today. So we're gonna go through a few things in this time that we have together this morning. As Amy shared, this is gonna be a chance to really give an overview of the policy agenda. We're gonna give everyone a chance to do introductions. This is a network and we need to give everyone space to participate because it is the people here in this call who are going to move this policy agenda forward and bring it to life. And so we're going to start out with a very brief icebreaker. We're going to hear from steering committee members on the key points of the policy agenda and the priorities. And then we're going to break into discussion groups. And you'll have a chance to choose the area that is most of interest to you and work with steering committee members who've been listening to the interest in the network, who've been collating and collecting and organizing all the data that you shared over several months to make these policy priorities come to life. And you'll have a chance to talk them through in small groups. And then we'll come back together for reflections and next steps. So it's going to be action-packed time together. But as I said, before we break into the specifics, we're going to do some introductions. So you're going to be invited into breakout rooms of 2 to 3 people each. And when you're there, introduce yourself, share your name, your connection to food policy work or food work in general. And one fun question, what's your favorite food available now in Ohio? As I said, we want this to be an interactive discussion with everyone's involvement. So I know that said, I know some people aren't a huge fan of breakout rooms. And if that's the case for you, we support you and you can stay in the main room and engage via chat. But we do really encourage people to get out of their comfort zones and get into those breakout rooms if you are so inclined. So we'll give you just 2 minutes in those breakout rooms in small groups, starting in just a second. Enjoy. Dive now into our presentations from steering committee members. We have 4 steering committee members who are here today to share the different policy statements and specific priorities. Each of these have been informed by network members through interactive agenda setting sessions from 2017 until 2020. I was fortunate enough to get to attend the session in November of last year when we talked through these and talked through implications and ideas, and there was an amazing amount of idea generation that the steering committee members took and continue to develop and build to create what we have here today. And so as you listen to these presentations, I invite you to think about the area that's most relevant to your work and your interest, because following these presentations, which are just going to be a couple of minutes each, we're going to break into small groups and talk through how to move these priorities forward as a network. As you hear these presentations, if you have any clarifying questions, go ahead and pop those in the chat. We may have some time to answer them for the full group, but if we don't have time, we'll make sure that the people who are facilitating the small groups know the questions that you're popping up as clarifying so that they can address them in those small group breakout rooms. So with no further ado, I'm so happy to introduce Amelie Lipstrew, who's the Policy Director at the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association. And she's been involved in agriculture and food system policy for more than 15 years. Amelie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dawn. It's great to be here and to connect with all of you. So this morning I'm talking a little bit about our local farms policy. Local farms are the bedrock of our local food system. The Ohio Food Policy Network supports policies that encourage the growth and production of farms in all areas of the state, particularly those small to mid-scale farms that serve Ohio markets and embrace responsible, resilient production methods and fair labor practices. Also, the lessons of the pandemic showed us how brittle our food system can be and why we need to look at the entire food supply chain with fresh eyes to ensure the security of our food supply and support distributed and diversified food systems that can respond effectively to disruption. With an understanding of the challenges ahead, we've identified 3 local farms policy priorities. The first is to incentivize and facilitate transfer of farmland to next generation farmers with a focus on young, beginning, and BIPOC farmers. The average age of farmers continues to climb, and as Ohio farmers age, we need to ensure we're doing everything we can to support the transfer of land to the next generation. Access to land is the biggest barrier facing beginning farmers right now. Ohio Representatives Susan Manchester and Mary Lightbody have introduced House Bill 95, the Family Farm Regeneration Act, which would provide tax incentives for landowners who transition land to a beginning farmer. The bill has overwhelming support, but is currently being held up by Ohio House Speaker Representative Cupp. The second policy priority identified in this area is to revise and clarify the Ohio Building Code to provide clear guidance and allow for high tunnel and hoop house construction in all jurisdictions. There's currently a lack of clarity as to whether these agricultural structures are subject to the Ohio Building Code. This leads to tremendous variability in how regulations are implemented and can require a formal engineering review and unnecessarily high fees. This is a disincentive to the expansion of urban agriculture at a time when USDA is making increased investments in this area in response to the need and demand for innovative agriculture in and around Ohio cities. The third and final policy area in the local farms bucket is to incentivize regenerative, sustainable farming practices that preserve and improve soil health. Soil is the foundation for life, for the nutritiousness of our food, for clean water, carbon sequestration, and resilience in the face of weather extremes. We face an existential crisis in climate change, and agriculture can be a key part of the solution. The policy priorities in this area must be addressed to protect the security and viability of our food system for the years to come. If we're to continue to have a strong and vibrant agricultural industry, we need to ensure there will be farmers able to access the land and farm, that urban farmers can use the tools and technologies they need to grow and sell food in their communities, and that we are giving farmers all the tools and resources they need to steward our natural resources, grow healthful food, and help fight climate change. Thanks, Dawn. I'll shoot it back to you.
Thanks so much, Emily, for that wonderful presentation on local farms. So as you were listening, if you have any clarifying questions, feel free to pop those in the chat, and know that if this is an area that you really want to dig into more, you'll have a chance to speak with Emily in the small group in just a few minutes. Now I'm really pleased to pass it over to Michelle M. Brown, who's the Executive Director of Local Matters in Columbus and also an OFPN Steering Committee member. She's the chair, actually, of the steering committee. She's been working for 25 years on social justice topics, and today is going to share with us the access and education priorities for the policy agenda. Welcome, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Dawn. Good morning, everyone. Our second policy area is access and education, and we believe that know that the ability to consume nutritious food is a key social determinant of health. So OFPN advocates for policies to address access for locally grown, healthy, and affordable food for all Ohioans. We additionally affirm that food education is essential to addressing diet-related diseases. We have 5 policy priorities for access and education, which I'll share with reasons why they each matter. Number 1, increase support for nutrition incentive programming in direct-to-consumer and retail settings throughout the state. Nutrition incentive programs are a nationally recognized evidence-based model that provide matching dollars for fruit and vegetable purchases. This successful strategy has been identified in Ohio's State Health Improvement Plan and by Health Policy Institute of Ohio as a means to address food insecurity and to improve health outcomes. Number 2, expand affordable supplemental nutrition assistance program, SNAP EBT, online access to small retailers, local farms, farmers markets, and for home delivery. Improvements are needed in this area because it's currently very cost intensive, inconvenient, and labor intensive to implement SNAP. Number 3, address SNAP EBT online and physical infrastructure to ensure accessible online sales for all customers and the ease of benefit processing. Currently, customers and organizations have to manage a variety of currencies, including tokens and coupons. We have a real need to streamline this process. Number 4, establish a statewide nutrition and food system education pilot program and nutrition standards for pre-K through 12 education. Ohio is the only state in the country that does not have health education standards, and the lack of nutrition education is contributing to a lower quality of life and racial disparities in life expectancy. And number 5, support farm-to-school initiatives to promote purchasing, serving, and teaching about locally produced foods in schools, and policies to encourage and streamline such activities. Similar to nutrition education, farm-to-school initiatives also increase local food growing, purchasing, and serving. There are several bipartisan federal bills that we can look to in the state of Ohio, including the Food and Nutrition Education in Schools Act and Kids Eat Local, sponsored by Ohio Senator Brown, as well as several other companion bills that we can look at and begin to implement here and then continue in our work in our communities. And the policy priorities in this area overall will increase access to nutritious food, and access and the availability and access is paired with education because they're fundamentally linked. Ideally, all children would receive comprehensive nutrition education in school. And as children develop self-efficacy in choosing more fruits and vegetables, their families need convenient access to those foods to sustain their behaviors and support positive health outcomes. For adults, how will someone diagnosed with diabetes make the changes that they want to make if there are 2.5 times the number of fast food outlets as there are healthy alternatives in their neighborhood? We must increase access to SNAP benefits and make sure that SNAP recipients can access food as easily as people with more resources. This should include the ability to use SNAP to purchase healthy food in your neighborhood, nutrition incentives to stretch your dollar further, and convenience such as pickup and delivery. With education, we have to start as young as possible and create nutrition standards to build student knowledge and skills throughout their pre-K through 12 experience. Partners such as Produce Perks Midwest, OSU Extension, multiple state agencies, Local Matters, Children's Hunger Alliance, the Farm Bureau, Live Healthy Appalachia, and so many local groups that are represented here today can collectively advance access and education. And by ensuring that everyone has food and culturally appropriate education, we will see improvements in health, workforce, and military readiness. Investment in this area is relatively low-hanging fruit for the future, and we've got a lot of ground to make up. And Ohio can be part of leading the solution. Thank you. Back to you, Dawn.
Thanks so much, Michelle, for outlining that important priorities with education and access. Again, as you have any clarifying questions, post those in the chat and know that you'll be able to talk to Michelle more about that in the breakout rooms in just a few minutes. Now I'm really pleased to pass it to Angela Blatt. Angela is the program manager for Initiative for Food and Agricultural Transformation at Ohio State University and vice chair for OFPN Steering Committee, who's going to share the priorities for infrastructure. Welcome, Angela.
Thanks, Dawn. Good morning, everyone. As Dawn said, my name is Angela Blatt, and I'm the vice chair for Ohio Food Policy Network. And our third policy area is infrastructure. Ohio Food Policy Network supports policies that develop the civic, social, physical, economic, and values-based infrastructure necessary for aggregation, distribution, processing, and retail to integrate local and regional supply chains. So in this area, we have 3 policy priorities for infrastructure. So the first one is create an interagency task force to identify existing food infrastructure development needs across different regions and financing options to support the development of infrastructure to serve small and mid-sized food system operations. The second one is create a robust financing tool that supports the development of local food supply chain infrastructure, including facilities for aggregation, processing, meat processing, cold storage, packaging, and distribution. State financing would help leverage federal funding as well as public-private partnerships. And the third priority is support the expansion of processing of livestock, aquaculture, and specialty crops across the state, including mobile processing options. So these policy priorities will strengthen local and regional food supply chains and increase resilience and economic growth for Ohio communities. And I just wanted to give a couple of examples of work happening in this priority area, specifically addressing food system finance and mobile meat slaughter and processing. So for food system finance, the Initiative for Food and Agricultural Transformation at Ohio State is collaborating with the Council of Development Finance Agencies to provide economic development finance planning services to improve food systems throughout the state of Ohio. So this approach will focus on using development finance tools such as tax-exempt bonds, tax credits, and revolving loan funds to meet infrastructure, agriculture, and small business needs in support of regional food system innovation. So over the last 6 months, INFACT has been working alongside CDFA to convene community leaders, development finance professionals, and food systems practitioners from throughout the region to finalize a development finance agency plan, hopefully to be completed in August. Another example is a project that's titled Advancing Mobile Meat Slaughter and Processing in Ohio and Central Appalachia. So as we know, demand for local meat continues to grow, but there are bottlenecks in the local meat value chain, especially limited processing capacity that continue to inhibit the market opportunities for livestock farmers in Ohio and Central Appalachia. So AceNet and other project partners are collaborating on a USDA local foods promotion program project to determine the need for additional local meat value chain interventions that serve red meat livestock farmers, processors, and consumers. So the primary activities for this project will be to assess the feasibility of mobile meat slaughter and processing for small scale family farmers in Ohio and Central Appalachia, and develop a network of interested producers, processors, and consumers, and create the necessary organizational and financial plans for a cooperative business to meet identified needs. So those are just a couple examples that I wanted to share, and now I will pass it back over to Dawn.
Thanks so much, Angela, for sharing those important priorities related to infrastructure. And now our final area is institutions. I am really pleased to introduce now Michaela Oldfield. She's the director of Greater Cincinnati Regional Food Policy Council for Green Umbrella and is the steering committee member who will be sharing institution policy priorities. Welcome, Michaela.
Thank you, Dawn. I'm excited to be here. So excited to be seeing this launched. So as Dawn said, I'm director of the Regional Food Policy Council for Greater Cincinnati. And our final policy area is institutions. So institutions create and expand markets for local food by vastly expanding their local food purchases. And OFPN supports food purchasing policies that reduce barriers for institutional buyers and drive the development of local and regional markets. And so in this area, there's two policy priorities. The first is that we would change contracting and procurement rules across state government to allow more vendors to participate in local and regional food purchasing. And the second is to increase the amount of reimbursement available to schools that do purchase local food. So institutions, as I said, play a key role in increasing demand for local food and supporting local farmers. We need institutions purchasing at scale to help rebuild the family farms and rural economies that made up the agriculture of the middle. So this is both the farms as well as the associated aggregating, processing, and distribution infrastructure that could have supported thriving rural economies and livelihoods, as well as urban food security. Many institutions are subject to purchasing and procurement regulations and/or are funded by public funding streams that restrict or control how they can be doing their purchasing. Their purchasing practices can therefore be influenced by advocating for policies that will either require them to purchase locally or regionally, providing flexibility that allows them to use values such as local and sustainable and equitable in addition to price when they evaluate a bid, or providing actual financial assistance to incentivize purchasing local. Currently, there's a group of partners, including the Ohio Farm to School Network, Ohio Department of Education, OSU, food hubs, and food service directors that are collectively exploring and advocating for policies to increase spending flexibility and incentives for schools to purchase more Ohio-grown product. We are looking for more collaborative partners to advance more local institutional purchasing. And this is an immediate opportunity if people want to get involved in developing some specific policy and advocating for it, you can reach out to me. And I'm going to hand it back to Dawn.
Thank you so much, Michaela. Really appreciate that overview of the importance of these policies. And thank you so much to all our speakers for sharing these priority areas. I'm now going to invite anyone who has clarifying questions. We're also going to post into the chat the link for you to be able to see all of the policies that you just heard outlined, since I know it was a lot of information, a lot of content that you just heard. Anyone have any clarifying questions? I didn't see anything come through in chat, but I want to just give you a minute. If there's questions you have on what you just heard, please go ahead and voice that. And thanks, Angela, for posting the link to the agenda if you'd like to have it as reference. All right, so clearly our speakers did a perfect job presenting. There's absolutely no questions coming through. That's great to hear. I'm sure there are some questions as you'll get into the breakout rooms and talk through the specifics and talk through the implications. So we're gonna go ahead and set up breakout rooms. As our organizers are getting that set up, you're gonna have a chance to pick the room that resonates most with you, that makes the most sense for you. There's, as we shared, local farms, access and education, infrastructure, and institutions. And in each breakout room, you're going to have one person who's going to be facilitating and someone who's going to be note taking. These are all members of the network steering committee who have signed up to take on this work. But really the time is yours. So everyone on this call's voice is very important because as a network, each member is needed to move the work forward. So please be an active participant in your breakout room. Don't be shy. Be courageous and speak up with any ideas that you have. We're hoping you can really get specific as you have these discussions. What are the opportunities you see in the near future? What impact can you see these priorities having on your work? The most powerful ideas will be things that will help you advance your work too, because then it'll be actually meaningful and helpful. So Amanda's setting up our breakout rooms, and Amanda, if it's okay, I think we're going to be able to do 20 minutes in each breakout room. And as you have that time together, you can talk through two big questions: how the policy priorities shared today affect you and the people you work with or the people you support. And how will you activate your networks, the people you're connected to in your work, in your relationships, in your communities, to collaborate and support these policy priorities? We're really hoping you can get specific, dig into who needs to come along for the ride, who's already there and will sign up and help move it forward. What concerns do you have? And you'll have a chance to talk through all that in your breakout rooms. Then we'll come back together and reflect on what we discussed. How are we doing?
Those, Dawn.
Sorry, say that once more, Amanda.
I was just launching them.
Great. All right, so everyone's going to have a chance to choose the room that they most want to join in just a second.
Hi, Dawn.
Group. All right, welcome back, everyone. So I'm looking forward to hearing the reflections on how those conversations went. Amy, you were with the local farms group. How did your conversation go? Can you share some highlights?
I can, and thank you, Dawn, and thanks to everybody who joined the local farms discussion. Our three areas relate to transfer of farmland, codes relating to high tunnels and hoop houses in urban agriculture, and incentivizing sustainable practices. And we had a robust discussion about each of these policy priority areas, specifically as it relates to land transfer and incentivizing the next generation of growers, particularly BIPOC and young farmers. House Bill 95, which Emily talked about in her presentation, was part of our discussion, not surprisingly, in our breakout room. And a call for each of us to call on our state reps to incentivize Speaker Cupp to bring it to the floor for a vote. It's passed the House and it just needs to go to the Senate for a vote. It's got great bipartisan support, and our networks can all be leveraged to help advance that. And we talked about specifically work in Columbus around revising building codes. So hoop houses and structures on urban farms can be less cumbersome to enact in community gardens and other infill growing opportunities. And we talked about some of us on the call are growing and our farmers who are using sustainable practices And so having those examples of growers who are involved with cover crops and bees and other things that can invest in soil health are great examples of people doing the work. So we have a strong network supporting local farms, and it was exciting to have that conversation with everyone.
Wow, thanks so much. Sounds like a really rich discussion in just 20 minutes. So a steering committee member we haven't heard from yet, but we're going to hear from now, is Marjorie Jean-Baptiste. And she was the facilitator for the biggest group today, Access and Education. Marjorie, how did the conversation go?
It went well. Thank you, Dawn. It was a robust conversation. So for the first question for Access and Education, we wanted to spend some time discussing how could those priorities affect the participants, people they work with. And so we talked about something that we've already talked about plenty of times in OFPN, which is streamlining the ability to use SNAP benefits. So that was a focal point. We also talked about the lack of education standards and advancing those standards through legislation, which Michelle gave an overview on, sort of pushing that nutrition piece to be a big focal point. And then we also addressed the issue of affordability and accessibility to healthy foods. So that was also a big piece for that particular question. And so for our last question, as far as what type of networks are people connected to, who needs to be a part of that conversation, who needs to be pushed along or helped along the way, who do we need to partner with? We actually got quite a few different organizations. So just naming a few here: Ohio Nutrition Incentive Network, the Children's Defense Fund, Children's Hunger Alliance, AHA, ADA, working with libraries, Local Matters, public health departments. So quite a few, even grassroots advocacy, growing to green with Franklin County, it's escaping me now. We're Growing to Green, and then the Growing and Growth Collective, the Food Equity Coalition in Dayton, the Ohio Women's Alliance. So lots of different organizations and groups and networks thrown out there for us to potentially partner with and work with in the future. The other question that came up, and the one that we addressed, is what potential barriers do we see going forward? We talked about a potential lack of curriculum as far as some of the school-based concerns, fears of misaligned curriculum and values, and then efforts at the State House to restrict access to SNAP. So those were some of the barriers. And then the other potential connection that I forgot to mention, but it's through the PTA Association, the Parent Teachers Association. So for anyone who has with that particular association, that would be something to think about. How do we connect and leverage that particular association with the work that we're doing here? So that's everything.
You covered a lot. Thank you so much for reflecting that back so clearly. Does sound like it was a very robust discussion and a lot of follow-ups. So look forward to hearing. And so it sounds like if there's a specific ask for connections to PTA, so if anyone on this call does have that, can they reach out to you, Marjorie? Is that a good next step?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent, great. Well, let's move to infrastructure next. Angela, do you want to share the takeaways from your group's conversation?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not as an efficient facilitator, so we ran out of time and got stuck on the first one for a little bit longer. A couple of things we talked about for how the priorities affect the people that we worked with and support. the thought of an interagency task force was important because of the need for the centralized place to discuss and clarify rules and regulations. So that was one of the topics of discussion, as well as looking at infrastructure needs for different types of local foods. So we had a representative for aquaculture in our group, which is something that tends to be missing from the conversation. So taking into consideration the fact that, you know, different processing is needed for different types of species. So not only is there a barrier for local processing for red meat, but there's also different infrastructure needs for aquaculture, and making sure that those folks are part of the conversation and sharing information as well. Also, with respect to financing, obviously this financing is a critical piece for infrastructure and all these priorities, and it's a barrier for food producers. So we need to support processing businesses with financing and not just support for farmers to process on their own. So, you know, farmers are there to farm, aquaculturists are raising fish. You know, the processing piece is missing as a centralized place for those producers to go. And then let's see, we talked a little bit about kind of the missing infrastructure at the neighborhood level. So something that's different or in between just your larger grocery stores or your farmers markets, having local food buying clubs and small grocery and aggregation points at the neighborhood level is something that is needed. Let's see. And then the last, let's see, this one's neighborhood level. So infrastructure creates market opportunities for new neighborhood and small scale food businesses. So this can shift the entire marketplace to that neighborhood level if well done. So on the second one, we talked a little bit about the sharing of information that already exists. So there are networks out there. There are financial resources, for example, CDFA, the Council of Development Finance Agencies. There's information on food system financing that maybe not getting to folks that need it. So people tend to default to the grant system rather than seeking out financing opportunities that could be there to support food businesses. So just making sure that folks, when they're having conversations in their networks, are sharing the information that already exists, making sure it's readily available to the folks that need it, rather than reinventing the wheel. And then, let's see. I think that was the main. So one other point. So each of these priorities requires statewide coordination with state government to get on their radar, and we need to activate the policy think tank networks to get our priorities on their agenda. So just making sure that policymakers and folks at the state level know what's needed and acting as a network to share this information and our needs. And if I missed anything from my group members, feel free to jump in.
Excellent. That's great, Angela. And it sounds like that could be something as a follow-up from OFPN to share out that readily available information so everyone has access to it and is able to distribute easily. Does that seem like a right follow-up?
Yeah, actually, and Ariel Miller, she's with the Council of Development Finance Agencies, just shared a link to the work that CDFA is doing in the food system financing space specifically. So there's a start.
Yeah, I linked to our page that has like a lot of information on it, but the white papers might be of interest to folks. We've been trying to talk to finance people to say like local food is important, and then also help local food folks learn about all the finance resources that are out there. So those papers and the research try to do a little bit of both.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing that resource, Ariel. And thanks, Angela, for your great summary. I'm going to give a chance for our institutions group to share. Sarah Giannetti is another steering committee member we haven't heard from yet, and Sarah was facilitating that conversation. Go ahead, Sarah.
Good morning, everyone. Well, based on the robust discussions that we heard from the first 3 policy groups, we really only had one attendee in ours, and was a representative from INFACT looking to write a story on the entire policy launch. So we answered a few small questions about reducing procurement barriers for schools, and disbanded and joined some other groups to see what everyone else is talking about. So I don't know if that's telling to where the interest is, but everyone was in the first 3 groups.
Yeah, it is an interesting point. And, you know, with networks, we always say go toward the energy. So if there's not energy toward a topic, that's an important piece of information. Either we need to do more to get people excited about it, or, you know, bring in fresh people, or maybe it's a sign for the network to focus on the first 3 areas more heavily in the short term, as the opportunities seem maybe more relevant. It's a great lesson and something to think through together. Thanks, Sarah, for sharing that. I'm going to hand it back to Michelle again. Michelle is going to close us out and share some of the next steps that you all can expect from the network.
Thanks so much, Dawn. It's been a great morning. I'm really grateful to all of you. Thanks for your participation. For next steps, the steering committee is going to share out more information for how you can get involved, how you can ask for support through the OFPN listserv. So if you're not signed up, you probably are, but it's OhioFPN.org, OHIOFPN.org. So please sign up for that and look out for more advocacy information. We're also going to send out a brief survey. So thank you in advance for your feedback on that. And our next events will be quarterly virtual convenings on each of the topics we covered today. I don't know, after this, institutions maybe it'll roll up into access and education. We'll see, but at any rate, join us on the quarterly calls to keep advancing the network together. And as you might have assumed or heard here, this is a volunteer network. It's not a formal organization, and we've been spending time really thinking about what this means. We do have some structures that guide us, including the 18-member steering committee and 3 committees in communications, engagement, and policy. And I wanted to just note that this fall, we will have opportunities for people to join the steering committee. So especially if your work in your community is underrepresented in what you're seeing here today, I would encourage you to bring more people along and consider whether you'd want to meet with us every other month and help move the work forward. And I would be remiss if I didn't share our annual summit. We're going on over 10 years. This is 11 or 12. I don't know, the virtual thing made me lose track a little bit, but this network has existed in various iterations over a long period of time. So we're excited for you to stay involved. I also wanted to thank Dawn Ortega. This event would not be possible without her leadership and the Institute for Conservation Leadership, who is volunteering their time as well to networks in Ohio. We would have looked a lot scrappier today if it wasn't for Dawn. And also just so much gratitude for everybody in the steering committee and the committees for jumping in and doing this. You know, a lot of us work professionally in food, but we don't necessarily have to be dedicating all of our time to this as well. And your efforts make this work very, very possible and exciting to be a part of. As we all, you know, reflect on the past year and a half, and we think about how we all realize that even though food was a right, is not readily available. This is what we knew before, but I think we have a particular obligation, you know, at this point, not to go back to normal. That's not a possibility. It's not what we wanted in the first place. So looking forward to advancing this work with you. And I thank you for your interest, your commitment to our food system, and to helping us build one that is more sustainable, equitable, healthful, resilient, and accessible. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend. And I think for those of us who want, we could stay until 10:45 and say goodbye. But everybody else, have a great weekend ahead. Feel free to stay with us if you like, and we look forward to seeing you next time.